The air in the courtroom tasted of recycled regret and polished wood. I, Eleanor Vance, a woman whose resilience was forged in the fire of abandonment, sat across the aisle from the woman who was once my daughter, Seraphina. At 39, Seraphina had the sculpted features of a wronged heroine, her eyes welling with tears that threatened to spill, but I knew better. Those tears were not for the children she had left, but for the inheritance she was determined to claim. 13 years. 13 years since she had walked away, leaving 3 small, terrified souls, Ethan, Lily, and Noah, on my doorstep, accompanied by a cold, typed note relinquishing all parental rights. I never chased her. I simply focused on patching the gaping holes in their young lives with the fierce, uncompromising love of a grandmother-turned-mother. Now she was back, not with remorse, but with a predatory demand for custody, purely motivated by the sudden, substantial trust fund left to the children by my late brother, Uncle Alistair. Madam Vance, Judge Sterling's voice cut through the silence, crisp and final. You have requested to present additional evidence regarding the petitioner's motivation. Please proceed. My hands, though aged, were steady as I reached into my briefcase. I didn't pull out bank statements or legal precedents. I pulled out 3 crumpled pieces of paper, meticulously preserved copies of text messages sent to me, her own mother, just weeks before this very trial. Your Honor, I began, my voice a low, resonant tremor that silenced the murmurings of the gallery. Before the petitioner, Seraphina Vance, sought to exercise her maternal rights, she sought to exercise her financial leverage. These messages expose the raw, ugly truth of her intent. I read them aloud. Each word a hammer blow against the fragile facade Seraphina had constructed. The first, dripping with legalistic threat. I am their biological mother. Any judge will side with me. Stop making this difficult, or you'll face the full force of family court. The second, a chilling escalation. My lawyer says your actions could be construed as child abduction, Grandma. You could be facing serious jail time if you don't cooperate. And finally, the message that stripped away any pretense of affection, revealing the financial predator beneath. Mom, if you voluntarily hand over custody, we can split the inheritance funds. But if you force me to go through with the trial, I will take everything. I will leave you with nothing. A collective gasp swept the room. Seraphina's perfect composure shattered. Her attorney, a young man who looked as though he wished the floor would swallow him whole, stared down at his notepad in silent agony. Judge Sterling, a man whose face usually betrayed nothing, leaned forward. Ms. Vance, do you confirm you authored and sent these threats to your mother, the respondent? Seraphina dissolved into theatrical sobs, clutching her chest. I was under immense stress, Your Honor. I didn't mean... She meant every word, Your Honor, I interjected, not allowing the pity play to gain traction. I looked directly at Seraphina, pouring all the grief and the 13 years of sacrifice into my gaze. I hold no desire for vengeance, Your Honor. I acknowledge Seraphina has struggled with personal demons, but I cannot, in good conscience, stand by and allow her to re-enter these children's lives she discarded without a backward glance, solely because a substantial sum of money is now attached to their names. The tension was suffocating. Every eye in the courtroom, every legal mind present, understood the gravity of the pivot. This was no longer a custody battle. It was a moral reckoning. Madam Vance, the judge inquired, his tone now heavy with respect. What precisely is your remedy? What do you seek from this court? I seek 3 things, Your Honor, I stated, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. First, I request this court grant me permanent, undisputed legal guardianship of Ethan, Lily, and Noah Vance. Second, that the petitioner's claim be dismissed with prejudice. And third, given the documented threats and emotional manipulation, I request a 5-year restraining order, preventing Seraphina from initiating contact with the children, unless they as adults choose to seek her out. Seraphina leaped from her seat, her calculated tears turning to genuine panicked fury. She can't steal my children forever, she screamed, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. I turned slowly, facing her fully. allowing her to witness the bottomless well of sorrow and resolution in my eyes. The words I spoke were not a lawyer's argument, but a mother's final verdict. "My daughter," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet audible to everyone. "You walked away from them 13 years ago. I am not stealing anything. I am merely protecting the souls you abandoned, the pieces of your own heart you cast aside." The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than any closing argument. It was the sound of a daughter's avarice being weighed against a grandmother's unwavering love and found criminally wanting. I knew, in that precise moment, that the trial was over, and the true, devastating battle, the battle for Seraphina's soul, was about to begin in the quiet of the judge's chambers. The stage was set, not just for a legal victory, but for a tragic display of broken family bonds. My heart ached, not for the victory, but for the crushing finality of watching my child choose greed over grace. I felt the profound loneliness of being the one left to clean up the wreckage, yet the fierce power of a defender who would rather face prison than fail her charges. I looked at the attorney, who subtly nodded, acknowledging the undeniable impact of my testimony. The weight of 13 years, of every scraped knee, every late-night fever, every graduation, every heartbreak that I had seen them through alone, settled around me like a righteous shield. The children deserved peace, and I was their unwavering guardian. The courtroom doors hissed shut behind me, isolating me in the long, marble-tiled corridor. The scent of antiseptic and stale coffee was a jarring contrast to the tempest raging inside my chest. I walked toward the ladies' room, needing a moment of solitude to prepare for the afternoon session, but stopped short upon hearing muffled, frantic voices emanating from a shadowed alcove near the water fountain. It was Seraphina and her attorney, locked in a desperate whispered argument. "You absolute fool, Seraphina," the young lawyer, Mr. Hayes, hissed. "You handed her the ammunition herself, threatening her with jail time? Discussing the inheritance split? I told you to maintain the facade of a heartbroken mother. I panicked. I thought she'd fold." Seraphina choked out, the raw sound of her true distress finally breaking through the performance. "She always folded, Mom always gives in." But she looked right through me, Hayes. She knows. She knows I only did this because of Marcus. My blood ran cold. Marcus. The name of the man who had been the architect of her original abandonment 13 years ago, now resurrected as the catalyst for her greed. I pressed myself against the cool marble, listening, unable to move. "Marcus gave me an ultimatum," Seraphina whispered, her voice laced with the kind of terror that only financial dependency can induce. "He said if I couldn't secure some capital, any capital, to contribute to his new venture, he would leave." "He's taking Paul Hayes?" "He's taking my boy Paul and walking out." The admission hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing my breath. Paul, my fourth grandchild. The one Seraphina had conceived 2 years after abandoning the first 3. The child she had chosen to keep because, as I would later learn, his father was wealthy and stable, a man who made her life convenient for a time. She had hidden the existence of this boy from me for 11 years, a secret testament to her selective, conditional motherhood. I stepped out from the shadows. The sound of my shoes clicking on the marble floor instantly silenced them. Seraphina whirled around, her eyes widening in a mixture of guilt and horror. Mr. Hayes merely sighed, running a weary hand through his hair, knowing the fight was now truly lost. "Paul," I murmured, tasting the name. A fresh grief. "The one you kept. The one who was born into the convenience of a rich man's life. The one you protected. Why? Why did you hide him from me, Seraphina? Was he too precious to taint with the shame of his abandoned siblings?" Seraphina stumbled, clutching the fountain's edge for support. "No, Mom, it wasn't like that. He was different. He was part of Marcus's plan. The other 3, they were just messy. They didn't fit. They were too much baggage for the new life I was building." "Baggage," I repeated, the word sounding like gravel. "Ethan, who was just learning to read. Lily, who needed a mother to soothe her night terrors. Noah, who still reached for your hand in his sleep. They were baggage, but Paul? Paul was a prop in your perfect selfish drama. My voice rose, raw and filled with years of stored anguish. 13 years ago, you chose a man over your children. Today, you are choosing another man over the possibility of redemption, over the sanctity of their peace. You didn't come back for them, Seraphina. You came back because Marcus threatened to take away the only thing you deemed valuable enough to keep, the illusion of a perfect life. She began to weep, truly this time, the tears of a woman realizing the full, catastrophic scope of her failures. He's leaving me, Mom. He's taking Paul and leaving me with nothing. Don't you see? I have nothing. I was hoping the inheritance. The 50,000 could save us. 50,000? I scoffed, a dry, bitter laugh escaping my lips. The children's inheritance is nearly 500,000, Seraphina. Don't diminish your greed, even now. You were planning to bleed them dry, just as you planned to use the threat of my imprisonment to pressure me into a settlement. I'm sorry, Mom, she pleaded, grabbing my arm. Her touch felt alien, desperate. I know I'm a terrible mother. But please, if you just tell the judge you'll reconsider the custody, maybe I can get some leverage back. I need Paul. I love Paul. I can't lose him too. The mention of Paul, the child she treasured and protected while discarding the others, solidified my resolve. It wasn't about mental illness or temporary hardship. It was about a fundamental flaw in her character, a cold, transactional view of love. Your love, Seraphina, is conditional and self-serving, I said, gently but firmly pulling my arm away. The moment a child becomes inconvenient, you trade them for a brighter future. Ethan, Lily, and Noah deserve better. They deserve a guardian who is their bedrock, not their negotiator. And Paul, too, deserves a mother who fights for him out of pure, selfless need, not out of fear of losing her financial security blanket. The trial continues in 20 minutes. Say what you need to say to Mr. Hayes. But know this, I am done compromising their safety for your comfort. I turned, leaving her trembling figure in the alcove. The weight of her betrayal, once a heavy cloak of sorrow, now felt like the armor of righteousness. I entered the restroom and stared into the mirror. My face was lined, but my eyes were clear and utterly resolved. I was fighting for more than custody. I was fighting for the very definition of family and unconditional love. Seraphina's pathetic confession, intended to evoke pity, had only strengthened my conviction. The children, all 4 of them, were victims of a woman who viewed parenthood as a negotiable asset. My duty, my sacred purpose, was to ensure that Ethan, Lily, and Noah would never be bartered again. I realized I was not just their protector, but their living memory of what fierce, unwavering commitment looked like. The afternoon session resumed, and the atmosphere was thick with the residue of our hallway confrontation. Seraphina was visibly shaken, her carefully constructed poise finally fractured. Judge Sterling had called her back to the stand, focusing his questioning not on the inheritance, but on the crucial period after the abandonment of Ethan, Lily, and Noah. This was the moment I had prepared for, the exposure of her calculated choices. Ms. Vance, the judge began, his tone measured but piercing. You have maintained that your decision to relinquish parental rights 13 years ago was due to profound mental and financial instability, a temporary breakdown that rendered you incapable of caring for your children. Is that correct? Seraphina nodded weakly. Yes, Your Honor. I was in a very dark place. And yet, Judge Sterling continued, lifting a new document, one that Seraphina's lawyer had frantically tried to suppress. This court record indicates that 2 years after you abandoned Ethan, Lily, and Noah, you successfully carried to term and maintained full custody of a 4th child, a son named Paul. The revelation stunned the gallery again. Seraphina's face drained of color, realizing the depth of the judge's investigative reach. She had successfully hidden Paul's existence for over a decade, preventing him from being entangled in the shame of her past. But the truth, like all her secrets, had a devastating way of surfacing. The petitioner not only maintained custody of Paul, I interjected calmly, handing my lawyer a detailed timeline, but raised him in a stable 2-parent home, benefiting from his father's significant financial resources. This demonstrates not an inability to parent, Your Honor. but a selective choice to abandon the first 3 children when their care interfered with her new social and romantic aspirations. The argument was irrefutable. Seraphina hadn't been incapable. She had been discriminatory. She had segmented her children into categories: the unwanted burden and the necessary accessory. The trauma of the baggage had been too much for her delicate new life with Marcus, but Paul, the trophy son, was acceptable. I then pulled out the original infamous note, the very one she had left with the 3 terrified children. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a piece of raw, literary cruelty that had haunted my sleep for 13 years. With the court's permission, I would like to read the letter of abandonment Seraphina left with my 3 grandchildren, I requested. Judge Sterling nodded gravely. I unfolded the yellowed paper. My voice trembled slightly as I read the detached, sterile prose that had replaced a farewell hug. To Eleanor Vance. Effective immediately, I, Seraphina Vance, permanently and irrevocably relinquish all custody, parental rights, and financial responsibility for Ethan, Lily, and Noah Vance. I require no contact and waive all future claims. They are better off without me. Do not attempt to find me. Signe Seraphina Vance. I paused, looking at Seraphina, who now had her head buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. This time, her tears were the genuine, agonizing tears of a woman facing the consequence of her own written cruelty. The key phrase, Your Honor, is, do not attempt to find me, I stressed. She cut herself off completely. She erased them from her narrative. And now, she attempts to rewrite the narrative for $500,000. I focused on the emotional impact. The trauma of that note, the clinical detachment, is what the children remember. Not a mother struggling, but a mother choosing to disappear. And knowing that she kept Paul, thriving in a lavish home while Ethan was quietly stealing food for his younger siblings because he thought I wasn't watching, is the final insult to my soul. My lawyer then introduced the testimony of a social worker who had consulted with the children immediately after their abandonment. The social worker detailed the profound sense of betrayal and the crippling fear of being unwanted that haunted Ethan. Lily and Noah, Ethan, only 6 at the time, had repeatedly asked, did we do something wrong? Why did Mama only take her new clothes but not us? This was the core of my case, the deep psychological wound inflicted by her choice. The fact that she was capable of being a mother, but refused to be their mother, made the abandonment unforgivable in the eyes of justice. Seraphina was not seeking a reunion. She was seeking a financial transaction, and her continued hypocrisy with Paul was the definitive proof. As the afternoon drew to a close, Seraphina's lawyer desperately tried to pivot to my own financial situation, suggesting my age and limited income made me an unsuitable, albeit loving, guardian. Madam Vance has no significant income outside of her modest pension, Mr. Hayes argued. She relies heavily on her adult son's financial support. The children's inheritance, while substantial, is restricted until they reach maturity. My client, Seraphina, has the earning potential to give them a much richer, more stable life now. I stood up, shaking my head gently. Your Honor, my wealth is measured in the children's laughter, their straight-A reports, and their ability to trust again. Seraphina's stability comes and goes with the mood of her current partner. The question before this court is not who can afford a bigger house, but who provides an unshakable moral foundation. And I, Eleanor Vance, have provided that for 13 years, with nothing but love and a fierce will. Seraphina abandoned them for money once. She will do it again. The judge adjourned the court, his expression unreadable, but I could feel the momentum swinging irreversibly. My sacrifice, my pain, and Seraphina's calculated cruelty were laid bare. The courtroom was silent, broken only by the sound of Seraphina's desolate sobs as her lawyer escorted her, defeated, from the room. I felt a pang of maternal grief, but it was quickly superseded by the image of Ethan, Lily, and Noah, their faces etched with the fear of being taken away. I would not allow it. I looked toward the doors, preparing myself for the true heroes of the story to speak, the children themselves. The next day belonged to the children. Judge Sterling had granted a special session, allowing my 3 grandchildren to address the court, not as objects of a legal dispute, but as participants with agency over their own futures. This was the moment I feared most. I had shielded them for so long, and now they had to revisit the deepest, darkest wound of their lives in public. Ethan, now 19 and carrying the quiet gravity of a man who was forced to grow up too fast, was the first to speak. He stood tall, dressed impeccably in a suit I had bought him for his high school graduation, his presence commanding. He didn't look at Seraphina. He addressed the judge directly, his voice clear, strong, and devoid of the childish tremor I remembered from years ago. Your Honor, my name is Ethan Vance. I am 19 years old, a student at State University, and I am here today to speak for myself, for Lily, and for Noah. He paused, collecting a breath that seemed to carry the weight of 13 years. I remember the day she left. It was a Tuesday. She didn't look back. She just left a note and a box of old toys. I was 6. I thought it was a game, a very cruel game. I spent the next 3 days sitting by the front door, convinced that if I was good enough, if I was quiet enough, she would come back and tell me it was all a joke. Lily, who was sitting beside me, quietly squeezed my hand. Tears were already streaming down the faces of several spectators, but Ethan's voice remained steady. We didn't cry much after the first month. We learned quickly that crying didn't bring her back, but it made Grandma Eleanor sad. So we stopped. We became a unit. When a child is abandoned, the world becomes a scary place. Every stranger is a threat. Every sudden noise is a sign of trouble. But Grandma Eleanor, she became our fortress. He turned slightly, his eyes finally meeting Seraphina's for the first time. Seraphina flinched as if struck. Ms. Vance, Ethan continued, his tone utterly clinical. You claim you want us back because you love us. But love, Your Honor, is action. Love is waking up at 2 a.m. to hold Lily through a nightmare. Love is helping Noah, who has dyslexia, with his reading, even though Grandma had to learn all the new teaching methods herself. Love is working 3 part-time jobs and never letting us feel the pinch of poverty. Love is sacrificing your retirement savings so I could afford my first year of college. You say you were too unstable to care for us. But we know now, from court documents, that 2 years later, you found the stability to raise Paul, your 4th child. You selectively chose which children fit your life. That, Your Honor, is not instability. That is selfishness. Ethan then brought up the issue of the inheritance, cutting straight to the heart of the matter with a maturity that defied his age. The trust fund from Uncle Alistair is a gift. A chance for us to repair the financial damage caused by years of living on Grandma's meager pension. Ms. Vance does not see it as a lifeline for her abandoned children. She sees it as $500,000 of easy cash to pay for her boyfriend's business venture and to keep her comfortable life. Her text messages to Grandma prove this. She threatened Grandma with jail time, with legal action, only because she wanted to strong-arm her way into half of our future. His voice cracked slightly, the emotion finally overwhelming the carefully constructed facade. I don't hate Ms. Vance, but I don't know her. She is a biological stranger. If she truly cared, she would have sent a card, a letter, anything in 13 years. She didn't. We deserve to live without the fear that one day she will decide we are valuable again and try to take us away. We deserve peace. He took a deep, shuddering breath, then looked at the judge, his eyes pleading. Your Honor, my request and the request of my siblings is simple. Let us stay with our true mother. Let us stay with Eleanor Vance. Grant the restraining order, not as punishment for her, but as protection for us. As Ethan stepped down, the silence in the room was thicker than ever. Lily, 16, a budding artist who hid her deep sensitivities well, stood up next, holding a framed piece of watercolor art. Your Honor, Lily's voice was softer, but held the sharp edge of teenage indignation. This is a painting I made of our house. It's not fancy, but it's safe. It smells like Grandma's apple pie, and the walls are full of our drawings. Ms. Vance's lawyer called Grandma's house modest. To us, it is a palace. It is where we learned that home isn't made of money, but of commitment. I do not want to leave this safe place. I want my real mother, Grandma Eleanor, to keep protecting us. Noah, only 14 and still prone to nervous fidgeting, could barely meet the judge's eyes. He didn't speak long, but his words were the most heartbreaking. I just want to know I won't have to pack my bags again." His simplicity, his raw fear, broke the last remaining defenses in the courtroom. Even Seraphina's own lawyer looked defeated, quietly wiping a tear from his eye. I rose and placed a reassuring hand on Noah's shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes about my promise to them. The truth, stripped bare by the children's own voices, was far more powerful than any legal argument. I knew then, with absolute certainty, that Judge Sterling had everything he needed. This case was no longer about law, it was about the profound, undeniable testimony of the heart. The courtroom was packed when Judge Sterling returned, his demeanor solemn, bearing the weight of a decision that would determine the entire future of a family. The tension was suffocating. I gripped the armrest, feeling Ethan, Lily, and Noah pressed close to me. Seraphina sat across the room, pale and defeated, her gaze fixed on the judge, but her eyes hollow, already mourning the loss of the inheritance she had banked on. This court has reviewed the petitioner's claim for parental rights, the respondent's counterclaim for permanent guardianship, and the testimony of the children themselves. Judge Sterling began, his voice slow and deliberate. This case is unusual because it is not about the respondent's lack of love, but the petitioner's failure of responsibility. He laid out the findings meticulously, addressing every point of law and morality. The text messages presented by the respondent, Eleanor Vance, unequivocally demonstrate that the petitioner's action was initiated not out of genuine maternal bond, but out of financial duress and greed. She sought to leverage her biological connection to extort a settlement from her own mother, threatening legal consequences including imprisonment. This is the definition of moral unsuitability. He then addressed Seraphina's greatest defense, the claim of mental incapacity during the time of abandonment. The petitioner's successful, functional parenting of a fourth child, Paul Vance, only 2 years after abandoning Ethan, Lily, and Noah, dismantles the claim of incapacity. It confirms that the abandonment was a selective and calculated choice, a decision to prioritize her new lifestyle over her existing children. The judge then looked directly at Seraphina, his eyes full of disappointment. "Ms. Vance, you failed to maintain contact, provide support, or show any interest in the welfare of Ethan, Lily, and Noah for 13 years. A biological link is a fact, but motherhood is a bond forged in sacrifice and commitment. That bond was broken by you and rebuilt, brick by painstaking brick, by your mother, Eleanor Vance." He reached for his gavel, a simple piece of wood that held the power of destiny. "Therefore, this court rules as follows. The petition for custody filed by Seraphina Vance is dismissed with prejudice." A quiet, collective sigh of relief swept through our side of the courtroom. Ethan leaned into me, his body shaking with silent emotion. Judge Sterling continued. "The court grants permanent, sole legal and physical guardianship of Ethan Vance, Lily Vance and Noah Vance to the respondent, Eleanor Vance." The finality of the ruling felt like a mountain lifting from my shoulders. It was done. They were safe. Then came the second part of the judgment, the one designed for protection. Further, in light of the petitioner's demonstrated attempts at financial coercion and emotional manipulation of the children's primary caregiver, this court deems a period of separation necessary for the children's psychological well-being. A 5-year restraining order is hereby issued, prohibiting Seraphina Vance from initiating any contact with Ethan, Lily, and Noah Vance. This order is subject to review only if the children, upon reaching adulthood, petition the court themselves. Seraphina didn't scream this time. She didn't cry theatrically. She simply made a small, choking sound, the sound of a dream of easy money dying. She stumbled out of the courtroom, leaving her lawyer standing alone to gather his papers. Her collapse was physical, immediate, and utterly devastating to witness. It wasn't the collapse of a mother losing her children, but of a desperate woman losing her last financial bet. Later that afternoon, after the celebratory, tearful hugs with my grandchildren, I received a call from Seraphina's lawyer. "Mr. Hayes," His voice was subdued. "Mrs. Vance, I just wanted to inform you that Seraphina's boyfriend, Marcus, left her immediately after the ruling. Took Paul too. He was only ever in it for the inheritance money, just as you suspected. She's completely destitute, no job, no place to live, and no support system. She's gone back to the city." A cold dread settled in my stomach, battling with the triumph of victory. I had won the legal battle, secured my children, but I had utterly lost my daughter. Seraphina was now truly alone, facing the terrifying consequences of her selfish choices. She was not just financially bankrupt, she was morally and emotionally desolate. "Mr. Hayes?" I asked quietly. Did she say anything? Anything at all about the children? She just kept repeating, "I lost everything, Mom. I lost everything." She never mentioned Ethan, Lily, or Noah by name, only the money and Paul. This confirmed the bitter truth. My daughter's love remained purely transactional. The victory felt profoundly heavy. I had protected my grandchildren, but I now faced the agonizing reality of being the only anchor left in Seraphina's life, even if she refused to hold on. The moral burden of my daughter's utter ruin was now mine to carry, a silent, heavy cross in the aftermath of our necessary triumph. I knew my work was not done. The legal chapter was closed, but the familial tragedy was just beginning. 3 months after the final verdict, life settled into a rhythm of quiet, protected normalcy. Ethan returned to college, Lily excelled in her high school art classes, and Noah finally started sleeping through the night without fear. Their laughter, once hesitant, now filled the house with robust joy. But the quiet in my own heart was constantly punctuated by the memory of Seraphina's defeated, desolate face as she walked out of the courtroom. I couldn't forget Mr. Hayes's words. "She's completely destitute. No job, no place to live." My lawyer had advised against any contact, citing the restraining order, but the law governs actions, not the agonizing pull of a mother's heart. I had fought to protect my grandchildren from my daughter, but I could not entirely abandon my daughter to herself. I used a private investigator, a quiet, discreet woman named Dana, to track Seraphina. Dana reported back 2 weeks later. Seraphina was staying in a cramped, dilapidated rooming house in a forgotten corner of the city. She was working sporadic under-the-table shifts at a greasy diner and subsisting on cheap takeout. The descent had been swift and brutal. One cold Tuesday morning, without telling anyone, I drove the 2 hours into the city. I found the house, a derelict Victorian listing dangerously to one side, its windows dark and lifeless. I found her room on the 3rd floor. I knocked softly. The door scraped open, revealing a woman who was a ghost of the polished Seraphina I had seen in court. Her hair was greasy, her clothes thin and stained, and her eyes, those dramatic eyes, were now simply vacant, ringed with exhaustion and misery. "Mom?" Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. She looked terrified, not of me, but of her own reality being exposed. I stepped inside the tiny room, which smelled of mildew and cheap cigarettes. I placed a large grocery bag on the worn, chipped table. It was filled with hearty food, homemade chili, fresh bread, and apples from my own tree. "I'm not here to break the restraining order, Seraphina. I'm here because I heard you were hungry," I stated, keeping my voice level, devoid of judgment. "And I'm not staying." Seraphina collapsed onto the single twin bed, burying her face in the thin blanket and finally allowing the tears of true despair to flow. The sobs were guttural, unrestrained, a sound far more agonizing than any courtroom performance. "I lost everything, Mom," she wept, the words muffled. "Marcus left. Took Paul. He said I was a liability, that I couldn't even secure $50,000 for him. He said I was a failure. He just drove away. I have nothing. You didn't lose Paul, Seraphina. Marcus stole him, yes, but you forfeited your right to fight for him the day you threatened to steal your other children's future," I stated, my voice holding a firm, unyielding boundary. "You need to understand the difference between being a victim of Marcus and being the architect of your own disaster." She looked up at me, her eyes red and pleading. But what am I supposed to do? I can't get a job. I haven't worked steadily in 15 years. I have no skills. I don't even know how to ride the bus anymore. I'm paralyzed, Mom. I'm completely paralyzed. You are not paralyzed, Seraphina. You are addicted to dependency, I countered, my voice softening slightly, but the core message remaining hard. 13 years ago, you chose a man to save you. 3 months ago, you tried to use money to save you. Now you're looking at me to save you. You need to save yourself. I pulled out a small, folded envelope and placed it next to the groceries. It wasn't cash. It was a list of names and addresses. This is the address for the city's women's shelter, which provides job training and counseling. This is the contact for Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the name of a counselor I used to see. I have paid for your first 4 sessions. After that, you pay for yourself, I explained. This is all the help I can give you. Nothing more, nothing less. Seraphina stared at the envelope, then back at me. Why, Mom? Why do this after I tried to send you to jail? Why didn't you just let me fall? Because, I whispered, kneeling beside her, the smell of her despair filling my nostrils. Because even though you are a terrible daughter to me, and a failed mother to Ethan, Lily, and Noah, you are still my child. And a mother, even a wounded one, finds it impossible to stand idly by and watch her own flesh and blood perish. But let me be perfectly clear, I am drawing a line here. This is an act of charity, not a treaty. If you try to contact the children before the 5 years are up, if you relapse and try to manipulate me, or if you use this help to find another man to cling to, the support stops. I will vanish and you will never hear from me again. You must earn your right back into humanity, Seraphina. Not into our family, but into basic human self-respect. I stood up, adjusting my coat. Eat the food. Call the shelter. And start the long, brutal climb back. I won't be back. This is your chance. Don't waste it. I left the room without a backward glance. The silence of the room, broken by her ragged breathing, echoing my own agonizing decision. I drove home, my hands gripping the wheel, tears of exhaustion blurring the highway. The victory in court had been a fight for justice. This secret visit was a fight for her soul. A fight I could only win by creating a principled distance. My heart was breaking, but my resolve was steel. I was not just teaching her about responsibility. I was teaching myself the hardest lesson of all, how to love someone by refusing to enable their destruction. The weeks following my visit to Seraphina were marked by a profound internal quiet. I had done what my conscience demanded, but the act was utterly solitary. I could not share this burden with Ethan, Lily, or Noah. Their peace was paramount, and they needed to believe their grandmother was only their protector, not their struggling mother's savior, my lawyer. Hearing of the potential breach of the restraining order, had called, his voice laced with concern. I simply told him I had confirmed Seraphina was no longer a threat to my grandchildren, a truth that felt both absolute and painfully incomplete. My daily life was a relentless exercise in balancing forgiveness with boundaries, a subtle dance I performed only in the quiet of my mind. I often thought back to our conversation in that dismal room. You need to save yourself. I realized that my decision to grant her minimal, non-financial, directed help was the final, highest act of tough love. Many people confuse true forgiveness with emotional appeasement, believing that love means accepting any behavior and cushioning all consequences. But I, Eleanor Vance, knew better. True love, the kind that heals and rebuilds, requires a scaffold of unbreakable standards. I recalled a conversation with Uncle Alistair years ago, who had been a man of immense principle. Eleanor, he had said, you can forgive someone's actions, but forgiveness doesn't revoke the consequences. Consequences are life's greatest teachers. If you shield Seraphina from her own mistakes, you steal her only chance at growth. Alistair's wisdom now became my mantra. I was not shielding Seraphina. I was forcing her to stand exposed to the chilling reality of her choices. I established a routine with Dana, the private investigator, now functioning as my silent, moral conduit. Dana was instructed to monitor Seraphina's actions, not her location. I needed to know if the envelope of resources had been used. 2 weeks later, Dana's report arrived. Seraphina had called the women's shelter number. She had gone to 2 AA meetings. She had also applied for 3 minimum wage jobs. The progress was glacial, but it was there. A flicker of self-determination, the smallest spark of responsibility. The true test of my resolve came a month later. A letter arrived in my mailbox, handwritten and addressed to me. It was from Seraphina. I felt a visceral rush of fear and hope. The letter was tear-stained and rambling, filled with apologies, but also pleas. She detailed the misery of her life, and then near the end, she breached the line. "Mom, the job training will take 6 months. I need a place to stay until then. I know I can't see the children, but if I could just stay in the guest room for a few weeks, I promise I'll be quiet. I need the stability. Please, Mom, just this one thing. I'm scared to be alone." My heart constricted. The old familiar urge to rescue, to nurture, to fold her back into the warmth of home was overwhelming. She was playing the exact card I had expected, the appeal to my maternal instinct to solve her problems. I took the letter to my home office, lit a match, and watched the paper curl and blacken in the heavy glass ashtray. I felt a sharp, agonizing pain, but also a fierce pride in my own strength. The next day, I called Dana. "Send her a text, please, from an untraceable number." The message should be short. "The help provided is adequate. Do not ask for more. You must find stability on your own. Do not elaborate." This was the boundary. Unyielding. Necessary. I was communicating that my love was not a bottomless resource to bail her out, but a quiet, powerful force demanding her self-reliance. If I let her back into the house, I would undo 13 years of my grandchildren's hard-won security, and I would condemn Seraphina to another cycle of dependency. My choice was not between loving Seraphina and not loving Seraphina. It was between loving the mother I was to Ethan, Lily, and Noah, and enabling the self-destruction of the child who abandoned them. The line was clear, drawn in the ash of the burned letter. My primary loyalty was to the vulnerable. That evening, I watched Ethan helping Noah with a complex science project. Lily was sketching quietly in the corner. They were safe, confident, and whole. Their peace was the sacred testament to my tough decision. I realized that setting a boundary with Seraphina was not an act of cruelty. It was the ultimate act of principled compassion, forcing her into the necessary isolation where true change could finally take root. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was the most loving, both for her and for the 3 souls who depended on my unwavering strength. A year had passed since the court ruling and my clandestine, painful visit to the city. My life with Ethan, Lily, and Noah was flourishing. Ethan had completed his freshman year with honors, taking on a campus job to lighten my load. Lily had won a regional art competition, her pieces often depicting quiet scenes of home and security, a clear reflection of the peace she now felt. Noah, conquering his dyslexia with relentless effort, had found his passion in robotics, his mind now fixed on building rather than fearing. Their stability was my reward. A daily affirmation that the battle had been worth the wounds. Seraphina remained a quiet, distant satellite. I had kept Dana on a minimal retainer, asking only for quarterly updates, insisting on no contact and no financial aid. The updates were concise, charting a slow, agonizing climb from the abyss. Report Q1. Admitted to the women's shelter. Engaged in mandatory group therapy. Found part-time work cleaning offices, working the graveyard shift. Report Q2. Moved out of the shelter into a shared room, paying rent reliably. Applied for vocational training in medical administration. Attendance at AA meetings remains consistent. Report Q3. Enrolled in the medical administration course. Left the cleaning job for a slightly better paying data entry position. Showed visible distress when talking about missing Paul. She has initiated no contact attempts toward me or the children. I would read these reports in my quiet study, a solitary spectator to my daughter's painful, gradual reclamation of her life. The pain was still present, a dull ache, but it was now laced with a tentative, cautious respect. She was following the only path I had left open, the path of self-sufficiency and accountability. She was learning for the first time that life doesn't hand out rewards. You have to earn them through relentless, humble effort. One evening, Lily approached me in the kitchen, a thoughtful frown creasing her brow. "Grandma," she said, holding a worn photograph of herself as a toddler, taken with Seraphina. "I found this in an old album." "She looks happy here, doesn't she?" I looked at the image. Seraphina was younger, her smile genuine, holding a tiny, gurgling lily. She was happy, my love. She genuinely loved you all in her own way, but she also loved escaping responsibility more. People sometimes are weak. They choose the easy path over the right one. "Do you think she'll ever get better?" Lily asked, the question heavy with a child's desire for completeness. "She is getting better, Lily," I answered honestly, using the past tense to describe the facts I knew. "She is fighting for her life right now. It is the hardest fight a person can have, the fight against yourself. Whether she gets better enough to be a true mother, that is a question only time, and her choices, can answer." "And what about Paul?" Lily asked, her concern shifting to her unknown half-brother. "Paul is still with his father, Marcus. Dana is keeping a passive eye on him. Right now, Seraphina has to focus on securing her own foundation before she can ever hope to fight for him. A broken person cannot fix another broken person." My honesty was vital. I did not want to romanticize Seraphina's absence, nor did I want to condemn her absolutely. I wanted my grandchildren to learn that life is complex, that people can fail monumentally, but that they can also choose to rebuild. The biggest lesson was that you are defined not by the collapse, but by the courage to stand up again. I received the most significant update in the final quarter report. Seraphina had successfully completed her vocational training, earning a certification in medical billing. She had secured a full-time position at a large local clinic, complete with health benefits, a huge step toward stability. The final sentence of Dana's report caused a surge of emotion that brought me to tears. Subject has shown no interest in legal action or seeking contact. Her current stated goal is to save enough money to hire an attorney and attempt to regain joint custody of her son, Paul, thereby demonstrating a renewed commitment to responsible, long-term mothering. It wasn't about us. It was about Paul, and that was the most reassuring progress of all. Her redemption, if it came, would be earned through the defense of the child she had not abandoned, proving that her lessons in responsibility were finally taking root. I knew the restraining order still stood, a necessary barrier, but my heart, once hardened by her betrayal, now held a fragile, cautious hope for her future. The long, silent year had proven that my principle of unwavering boundaries was the very catalyst she needed to find her own feet. The next year brought another momentous change. Ethan turned 21. This age was significant, as it was the point at which he legally gained access to the full trust fund established by Uncle Alistair, the very money that had driven Seraphina to attempt her legal and emotional blackmail. The total, after years of careful investment, was now well over $600,000. I was nervous. The freedom of such vast funds can be a dangerous thing for a young man, but I trusted Ethan's character, forged in hardship and grounded by responsibility. We sat down together in my study, the initial paperwork for the release of funds spread across the desk. "Grandma," Ethan said, his hand resting on the documents, "I need to talk to you about this money." I prepared myself for a discussion about a new car, or perhaps a down payment on a place near campus. "I'm listening, dear heart. Whatever you decide, it's yours. Just promise me you'll invest wisely." Ethan looked at me, his eyes brimming with an intense, quiet affection that made my own eyes prickle. "I'm investing in the only thing that truly matters, Grandma. You." He pushed a folder across the desk. Inside were documents, not for his own gain, but for mine. It was a fully paid-off mortgage. The house, he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "The mortgage is completely settled. I used $120,000 to clear the debt. This house, the palace that Lily talked about in court, is finally, completely yours. No more payments, no more stress, no more working extra shifts to keep the lights on." I stared at the paperwork, tears blurring the neat lines of the bank seal. I couldn't speak. My hands flew to my mouth, muffling a shocked gasp. The decades of financial strain, the gnawing worry about retirement, the relentless work to make up for my daughter's negligence. It had all evaporated in a single, magnificent gesture of gratitude, Ethan. I finally managed, my voice breaking. You didn't have to do that. That money was meant for your education, your future. This is my education, Grandma. This is the definition of my future, he insisted, reaching across the table to take my hand. The money was supposed to save us from Seraphina's greed, but it also became the perfect opportunity for me to repay the only person who has ever truly sacrificed for me. You taught us that love is action. This is my action. This is me protecting your safety and your peace of mind. He then revealed a deeper plan, a plan that spoke volumes about the unity and maturity of my grandchildren. Lily and Noah agree. We all spoke about it. We've established a joint investment account with the remainder of the funds, nearly $500,000, which we will manage together. We're using a portion to open a high-interest retirement fund for you, completely separate from our main account. You are never going to worry about money again, Grandma. You are going to live the long, peaceful retirement you deserve. We are going to take care of you, just as you took care of us when no one else would. I wept, open and unashamed, the accumulated relief and gratitude washing over me. This was the true climax of the story, not the legal victory, but the powerful spiritual triumph of a family that chose loyalty over law and gratitude over financial entitlement. Seraphina had sought to divide and conquer for money. My grandchildren had united to use that very money to heal and protect. Later that evening, as I sat on my newly owned front porch, watching the sunset, a familiar feeling of cautious hope returned. The phone rang. It was Dana. Mrs. Vance, a small anonymous package arrived for you today. It was sent to your lawyer's office with strict instructions. Deliver only to Eleanor Vance, do not reveal sender. It's a book. A first edition of The Great Gatsby. I paused. The Great Gatsby was my favorite book, one I had read to Seraphina repeatedly when she was a child. It was the only book she had referenced in a school essay she had written years ago. It was a profound, deeply personal gesture. Is there any return address? I asked softly. No, ma'am. But the lawyer recognized the handwriting on the interior inscription. To E, from S. The green light still shines for you. The message was a double helix of apology and regret. It wasn't just a nod to The Great Gatsby. It was an acknowledgement of my own green light, the hope I kept shining for her. Seraphina had not only rebuilt her life but was attempting, from a mandated respectful distance, to acknowledge the wounds she had caused. I knew that the long, silent road was working. The boundary was holding, and on the other side of that boundary, my daughter was finally learning the true value of integrity, humility, and the powerful, silent language of self-reconciliation. The gift from Ethan was the financial climax. The gift from Seraphina was the emotional climax, a promise of a future distant and undefined, but built on genuine remorse. 2 more years passed, bringing us closer to the expiration of the 5-year restraining order. The atmosphere in our home was one of absolute, unshakable security. Ethan was flourishing in his major, Lily was preparing for art school applications, and Noah was the captain of his robotics team. The painful past was not forgotten, but it was now a foundation, not a burden. The question of Seraphina, however, began to surface more naturally, especially from Lily, one Sunday afternoon. While we were baking our traditional apple pie, Lily brought it up casually. Grandma, the restraining order is almost done. Do you ever hear from her? I stopped kneading the dough and looked at her, meeting her gaze with unflinching honesty. This was the moment for them to claim their own autonomy in this tragedy. I have not had any direct contact with Seraphina since the trial, my love. That was the law, and that was my promise to you all. But yes, I know she is alive, well, and working hard. I briefly mentioned the anonymous book, keeping the inscription private but acknowledging the gesture. She is a different person now. She worked her way through a shelter, job training, and she has secured a stable career in medical billing. She is, to the best of my knowledge, living an independent, responsible life. Is she still fighting for Paul? Lily asked, her hands still kneading the dough, her focus elsewhere. Yes, she is. She is saving her money. She hasn't hired a lawyer yet, but Dana, my investigator, says she has a detailed plan. That struggle is defining her now, Lily. Fighting for the child she kept is helping her understand the gravity of the children she let go. Lily paused, looking out the kitchen window at the winter landscape. I don't hate her, Grandma. I think I used to, but now I just pity her. I pity the choices she made because look what she missed. She missed everything. She missed everything. I agreed softly, a tear tracing a path down my cheek. But the key here is, you decide now, Lily. The restraining order was put in place to protect you when you were children. When it expires, you will all be adults, capable of making your own choices. If you choose to reach out to her, I will support you. If you choose never to speak to her again, I will support you. Your peace is the only priority. This conversation was a crucial turning point. I had fought the legal battle. Now I had to step back and allow them to fight the emotional one, granting them the ultimate gift of agency. The following week, Noah, usually silent on the matter, came into my study with a tentative look. Grandma, I wanted to ask about Paul, he mumbled, fiddling with a small circuit board. Since she's fighting for him, do you think he's like us? Do you think he knows about us? I can't know what Marcus told him, Noah, but I can tell you that you are not like anyone else. You, Ethan, and Lily are individuals forged in fire, and you are magnificent, I said, walking over and kneeling beside him. The bond you have with your siblings is extraordinary. Paul is your half-brother, and one day, if you choose, you may meet him. But your worth, Noah, is not defined by any missing piece of your biological family. It's defined by the love right here, in this house. A few days later, a strange, beautiful thing happened. A large, beautifully illustrated science book arrived at the house, addressed only to Noah Vance, robotics captain. It contained detailed schematics for advanced robotics. The return address was a generic post office box. I knew immediately where it came from. I held the heavy book, sensing the fear, the hope, and the desperate yearning poured into the anonymous gesture. I handed the book to Noah. His eyes widened. He immediately tore into the pages, engrossed. Who sent this, Grandma? He asked, already lost in the diagrams. A well-wisher, my love, I said, lying for the first and last time in this entire ordeal. I wanted the gift to be pure, untainted by the bitterness of the past. It was Seraphina's quiet, respectful way of parenting from a distance, of acknowledging his growth without violating the court's decree or the boundary I had set. I called Dana later that day. The book worked. She sent a book of robotics schematics to Noah. She asks about them constantly, Mrs. Vance, Dana confessed quietly. She knows all their milestones. She looks up Ethan's college newspaper, Lily's art show dates. She is living vicariously, respectfully through their success. She is doing the time, but she is serving the sentence right, by focusing on rebuilding herself. I hung up, a profound sense of peace settling over me. Seraphina was not only walking the path to redemption, but she was finding ways to connect that were appropriate, loving, and entirely without expectation. She was proving that sometimes, the greatest act of love is the courage to stand aside and simply admire the blossoming of the children you were too weak to raise. The final chapter was approaching, and I knew it would be a chapter of grace, not recrimination. The 5-year restraining order was set to expire in 3 weeks. The anticipation in the house was palpable, a mix of curiosity, nervousness, and quiet hope. Ethan, now 22, was preparing to move to the city for graduate school, taking his maturity and the inheritance he had managed so wisely with him. Lily was accepted into her top-choice art college, and Noah, 19, was already discussing career paths in engineering. They had not mentioned initiating contact, but the air was charged with the possibility. They were whole, successful, and independent. My mission was complete. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, enjoying the view of my fully paid-off home, a gift from my grateful grandson. When I finally drafted the letter I knew I had to write, not to Seraphina, but to my children. the 3 souls who had endured this odyssey with me. The letter spoke of their strength, their unity, and the immense pride I felt in the moral compass they had developed. I reiterated that their decision regarding Seraphina was solely theirs, free from any of my influence or pain. I sealed it, a final ceremonial act of letting go. That evening, I received a hand-delivered letter. It was from Seraphina. It had been slipped under the door. I opened it slowly. Her handwriting was no longer frantic. It was neat, controlled, and deeply thoughtful. It contained no pleas, no requests for money or contact. It was simply an elegant single paragraph. Mom, the time is almost up. I want you to know I have hired a family attorney and started the legal process to fight for Paul. I am using my own savings, and the fight is long, but I am stable. I am not writing this for contact. I am writing to tell you. I finally understand the difference between forgiveness and consequence. You saved my life by refusing to enable my worst self. For that, I am eternally grateful. My deepest hope is that Ethan, Lily, and Noah are proud of the woman they will never know. I will always respect the distance. Sincerely, Seraphina. I wept, but these were the purest tears of the entire 5 years. They were tears of relief, of grace, and of the profound realization that my painful principle, the refusal to let her back in until she had earned her own stability, had worked. She was fighting for Paul out of genuine maternal devotion, not financial fear. The next day, I drove to my lawyer's office. I instructed him to file a formal document with the court, a petition to vacate the 5-year restraining order early, noting that the petitioner was no longer deemed a threat to the children's psychological well-being. Why, Mrs. Vance? My lawyer asked, confused. The time is almost up anyway. Because, Mr. Hayes, I am not a jailer. I am a mother, and the moment the prisoner demonstrates genuine, independently achieved redemption, the bars must be removed. The court order was about protection. Now it is about grace. The order was lifted quietly. I never contacted Seraphina. I simply waited. 2 weeks later, Ethan called me from the city. Grandma, a friend of mine, a law student, told me the restraining order was lifted early. Did you? I did, my love. It was time. The legal decision is now officially yours. He was silent for a long time. I think I'll wait, Grandma. I don't need her now. But maybe, when I'm completely settled, I'll send a postcard. Not for me, but maybe to show her what she missed. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the children's self-possession. They didn't need her. They simply offered the possibility of peace. The scars and the lesson. The ultimate test of love is not how much you are willing to sacrifice, but how strong you are willing to be when setting the boundaries that force others to grow. I, Eleanor Vance, fought a court battle not to imprison my daughter, but to liberate my grandchildren and, ironically, to save my daughter's soul. Never confuse enabling with unconditional love. Sometimes the kindest act is the firmest refusal. Our children deserve a guardian who is their unwavering principal, their absolute bedrock, not their negotiator. If you have ever had to make a difficult choice to protect the innocent and teach responsibility, I urge you to share your story below and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can explore the profound educational power of principled love in the face of betrayal.